Hello and welcome to our next session on pitching. In our previous session, we'd taken a good look at business model, and I think it's now time for us to move on to the concept of competition. When we stopped, we had gone out and put together a pictorial diagram in front of you, which is what you see right now. And in this diagram, we laid out the process that a business follows or uses or works with to create and generate value for both itself, its shareholders, its owners, and its customers. In this session, we will take a look at how competition affects that. And I think if you go back to the sequence of building a pitch, we've covered to some extent the concept of a business model. So we've done this to some extent. We've talked a bit about market sizing and opportunity as it's represented by understanding exactly what the customer requires and needs, and how does that translate into value. A part of it gets addressed in the concept and problem piece. And then before we move on, we need to take these two pieces: the special sauce that allows us to stand out as a business, and how we compare or compete with the competition. It's these two pieces that we're going to focus on in our next session. Alright, so now if you put a black box, and let's just call this black box the business model. The essence of this black box is that there are resources that come into a business as inputs, and sometimes this is people, sometimes it's capital, sometimes it's raw materials, right? And the business, using its business model, then goes out and produces output, and this output basically gets sold to customers. And this model works. Everybody is happy as long as you spend $2 going in and you get $3, $4, or $5 coming out. And the difference between these two, what goes in, the net difference between what goes in and what goes out, is the margin that you get to keep as a business, right? However, over a period of time, as more and more people see what you're doing and they realize that there is money to be made in this entire process, there is going to be what we call competition. And competition can come in many ways. There could be competition for resources. So over a period of time, as more people find out what you've been up to, you may find that there is increasing competition for the overall business model. You may find that resources or talent or people that you were able to hire earlier are no longer that easy to hire, because there are more people using the same talent for perhaps a similar business model, or for doing things slightly differently for different products, for different markets. While capital may not necessarily be a constraint, you may find that resource material or raw material that you need to build things or create things or make things has suddenly gone through the roof, and it is no longer possible for you to stick to the unit cost that you originally built your projections on. And because you can no longer work with the unit cost that you factored in, you cannot work with the prices that you commit to customers, and somehow there is now increasing pressure on your margins, because it is no longer possible for you to get all of these pieces that you were able to get earlier on the same terms and conditions. At other time, you see competition happening here. So while there is no longer competition, or there may no longer necessarily be competition at the resource level, there could certainly be competition at a customer level, where competitors can come up with substitute products, with subs that can compete just as effectively. If you're lucky, they are crude approximation with respect to the value that your product provides. If you're unlucky, they are far superior, far better, cheaper, leaner, and meaner than what you've been able to put together. Okay. So this works on both dimensions, and your ability to effectively compete and stand out and survive this onslaught is very, very, very strongly dependent on your ability to go out and put together a wall. And this wall that you put together basically goes out and says that, listen, as far as this business model is concerned, there is only one gate, and I control this gate. and unless and until you have my consent, you cannot come in and step in here, right? So this is the concept. This what you just, these walls that you've just drawn are directly these walls that you've just drawn are linked to a concept that we call, or we know as, barriers to entry. And again, as a business, the stronger this barrier to entry, the more robust the barrier to entry your business model, your approach, your mindset, and your competitive landscape creates, the stronger the chances that you will be able to effectively defend your margin, one, and that your advantage, your competitive advantage, which would be something that we would call a sustainable competitive advantage. Something that can stand advantage, something that can stand the test of time. Alright? Now, as a judge and as a mentor, I see a lot of presentation when a student or a mentee comes along and says that, I have a sustainable competitive advantage over my competition. So competitive advantage. I have a sustainable competitive advantage. And I have a quick list of questions that I ask them to understand how real that advantage is, and do they actually appreciate what they've just gone out and said. The first, so in view of the statement that has just been made, that I have a sustainable competitive advantage, there is a very simplified catalog of advantages that you can work with. There are only three types. The first is what we call scale. The second is what we call captive customers. And the third is what we call proprietary, so process or processes, right? There are only three types. Scale is the simplest and the easiest to understand. If you start off with scale, and if I go out and say, if I go out and make a statement that I have a competitive advantage in terms of scale, there is a very simple test, and that simple test is that if I draw a cost curve, so there you go, that's my cost curve. If I draw a cost curve where this is the volume, the unit volume produced, and this is my unit cost. A cost curve here basically indicates, the one that you see in front of you indicates, that as you increase the volume, your costs will keep on declining and falling down. If you have a competitive advantage on the scale side, you actually won't see a cost curve along this line. You'll actually see a cost curve that shouldn't flatten out at all. You should actually see a cost curve that goes like this, right? So you will, as you carry on ramping up volume, you will carry on reducing the unit cost. If you don't have this advantage, if you don't see what you see here, right? If you don't have this advantage, then your cost curve basically flattens out over a period of time. And then it simply becomes a question of where you are with respect to the competition. So let's say you are here, and the competition is here when we start tracking costs. So this is us, and this is them. Over a period of time, if you look at the advantage here, the advantage here in terms of unit cost is actually quite substantial. So it's quite large and quite substantial. But over a period of time, as you move forward, you will find, so at point 2, you may be here and the competition may be here. So again, this is us and this is them. And while in the beginning the cost advantage was quite substantial, by the time we are a few years later, when the competition has caught up with us in terms of both volume and the market size, the cost curve is not that substantial. If you look at the difference, the difference is not that substantial. So from, at this stage in the beginning when we started, you actually had a marked distinct cost advantage. By the time you get to the second iteration, so this is 1 and this is 2, by the time you get to the second iteration of measuring how the costs compare, you find that your advantage has eroded to a large extent, and it's only a function or a period of time before they actually catch up with what you're up to. On the other hand, if you're here at step 1 and they're here at step 2, and then you're here at step 1 and they're and sorry, if you're here at step 2 and they're at step 2, again, while the advantage has certainly reduced, but it is still significant. And as you move forward, while it may reduce, there will always be some distance. So the first problem that comes up with scale is that scale is something which is very, very difficult to judge and gauge, and the issue most people go out, the mistake that most people go out and make when they start talking about scale as a competitive advantage is that they say that we have a sustainable advantage in terms of scale. Now, if I am, let's say, running an intelligence shop and I want to understand or assess or gauge how sustainable your advantage is, there are some very simple tools or tests that I can use to estimate, to understand whether you have scale. Right? So if you have scale on the manufacturing side, you will actually have one huge humongousaurus. Sorry, Benton. You will have one huge, large facility where all of your manufacturing would be consolidated. Because you want to ride the cost curve, and the larger this volume, the lower your costs. So everything that you would do would be factored, would be geared, would be consolidated here, and then you would sort out logistics for shipping your production from here to the rest of the world. So when somebody comes and tells me that Intel has a manufacturing scale advantage, I simply ask that, if that's the case, then Intel should only have one large, huge manufacturing facility. That is no longer or necessarily the case. If you say that Coke has a manufacturing advantage or Pepsi has a manufacturing advantage, I would once again ask, how many bottling, production or manufacturing plants does Coke have? Do they have one plant in the center of the globe that ships to all other pieces and locations in the planet, or they actually have multiple plants? If they have multiple plants, then the advantage may certainly be there, but it's not in manufacturing. It's not a cost advantage with respect to per unit produced. With both of these entities, with Intel, with Coke, and with Pepsi, the advantage is not one in manufacturing. With Intel, for example, it takes at least a couple of billion US dollars to do the R&D on a new chip. And if Intel has a customer base of millions and millions of users who are comfortable with the Intel brand and the Intel product, and are comfortable in buying that product, or locked in an upgrade path where they'll carry on buying Intel products, Intel has a significant advantage where this R&D is distributed over a very large user base. So if there are 200 million PCs manufactured and sold in the world, and they all have an Intel processor, Intel's cost of R&D of, let's say, 2 billion, so 2 billion US dollars is spread over how many users? Let's say 200 million. So this gets cancelled out, this gets cancelled out, this gets cancelled out, this gets cancelled out, this gets cancelled out. It's about $10. So you're saying, every time Intel produces a chip and it spends $2 billion, its R&D cost of that chip is about $10 per chip, because the volume Intel produces and is able to sell is about 200 million. Right? If you compare this with one of Intel's competitors, and let's say this competitor is a new upcoming startup that's come up with a brilliant design, brilliant product, brilliant idea, brilliant concept that should really do well, but they're only able to sell 10 million chips for the first edition, for the first design. Their cost, they spend the same $2 billion. So again, we're looking at the same 9 zeros divided by 10 million. In this specific case, their cost is, let's just cancel this, is about $200. So in terms of R&D, Intel has a great advantage. Same goes for marketing. If Intel has a marketing budget of $2 billion, their marketing allocation across 200 million units is about $10 of business development, right? And our upcoming startup, if they want to compete with Intel, they at least have to be visible on the marketing spectrum compared to Intel's business dollars. And let's say they don't spend $2 billion, but they spend $1 billion on marketing the product. Given the fact that they only have 10 million units they only expect to sell 10 million units, their marketing cost per processor per chip is about not 200, but certainly $100. So where Intel's cost of marketing, business development, research and development is about $20 per chip, these guys would end up spending $300 per chip. From a cost point of view, that gives Intel a huge advantage. They are able to sell a chip. If you add, let's say, another $10 for manufacturing, for design, for and another $10 for the distribution piece, so Intel's overall cost is about $40. They will still make tons of money if they sell the chip for $150 to start with, and in the next 2 years, bring it all the way down to $75. They would still make a margin of almost 100%, which is about $35 over 40, as long as they're able to sell the chip at $75. Whereas these guys, they can only sell the chip at 300. They can only break even if they sell the chip at 300. Their only saving grace would be that rather than selling 10 million, they're able to sell 100 million chips. But that is something that Intel's going to fight them tooth and nail about, right? So that's the manufacturing. That's the scale advantage, not the manufacturing advantage. In this specific case, we actually have an instance where the cost curve is exactly like a linear straight line. As you add more units, it will reduce because the allocation is linear. It doesn't come down. If Intel goes from selling 200 units to, let's say, 400 million units, this cost will come down again by the amount or by the order by which sales have gone up. And and it works for these guys also. If the hungry startup that's competing with Intel at the same point in time does something similar, you will see exactly the same analysis and exactly the same presentation. So now we move on to our next stage, which is, we spoke about in terms of competitive advantages, what are the choices that you have. The first element that we spoke about was scale, and we just looked at an example where we've spoken about So we look at an example where we've just spoken about the example of, so we've just looked at the first variation of a competitive advantage, which is scale. Let's take a look at captive customers. Now, in terms of working with captive customers, let me add another page here. In terms of working with captive customers, if this is the field, if this is the universe that includes all of my possible target customers, large part of businesses focus on the mainstream, right? So this is mainstream. These are all mainstream customers. These are customers that are easy to focus on, that come to your mind immediately. Now, for example, let's say I run a newspaper. My mainstream market is a normal household, right? So I produce a newspaper for the mainstream market, which is the normal household, and I'm not focused on anybody outside this window. So, for example, if I'm not interested, if I'm not a normal household, I'm somebody who works on the street, I would want to see a paper that's focused primarily on financial news. If I'm somebody who, let's say, works in the sports arena, I would like to see something which is specifically focused on what's happening in the sports industry. If I'm somebody who works in the entertainment space, I would want to see something which is specific to the entertainment space. If I'm somebody who focuses completely on publishing or even media for that matter, I'd like to see something which is specific, right? So in addition to the mainstream periodical, daily, magazine, there are opportunities, there are customers who are not mainstream, who are sort of on the edge in these three or four spaces, and this mainstream newspaper cannot satisfy the demands and the needs and the wants and the desires and the wishes of these four. So 1, 2, 3, these four segments. If it tried to focus on any one, it would very quickly lose its mainstream identity and transfer itself towards the edge. Once again, the mistake that most startups make is that they say, I'm going to go after the mainstream. I'm going to take the big guys head on. I want to kill them, destroy them, reduce them to, a shadow of who they are. And I'm going to do that by basically going after their jugular, which is their mainstream customer base. So that doesn't work. And the reason why that doesn't work is because, these guys are smart, they're intelligent, they have resources, they have money, they have cash, they've got a baseball bat, and they'll come after you with that baseball bat. If you've been in this industry, if you've been working on a specific sector or vertical of the market, you're not going to stand still and let some, itsy bitsy piddly little new company come in and walk all over your customers. You're going to defend it as savagely as possible. So your best bet is to actually not come in at the mainstream, but come in from the edge. Right? And the reason why you would be successful if you came in from the edge, and I'm not saying you come on all the four edges at the same time, but you pick one. You pick one where you have the best possible chance, and you come in on this specific side, and you take this market, right? And the reason why you'd be able to take this market is because you would be able to get as close as possible to your target market's dream state or end state. You'd be able to give them what they want without sacrificing too much by focusing on the mainstream, right? So if you extend this analysis, the second competitive advantage that is possible, that you're going to see, and that's actually quite common, is what we call captive customers. Or the power of a niche market. Now, when I say captive customers, captive customers are people who are beholden to a given product, vendor, supplier relationship. And the reason why they are beholden is because there are what we would call switching costs associated with moving from your current brand. So there are switching costs associated with your current brand to your new future brand. And these switching costs can take many shapes and forms. You can't switch from Word, or there was a time where you couldn't switch from Word to any other Office product because Word had its own format. So if you couldn't transfer or translate all of your documents and open them without any problems in the new tool, it makes sense to switch to a different word processor or Office processor, because your history, your archive, your material that you'd built over the last 10, 15, 20 years would simply go to waste. Right? Another great examples are what we call frequent flyer cards. So if you're a gold customer on an airline, you've sort of locked in yourself to that specific relationship, because anywhere else will take you at least a couple of years or a couple of months of active traveling to get back to that status. And beyond the benefits that come with a gold card, there's also this question of expectations. You have fairly The reason why you're gold customer is because you have fairly stable expectations, and the airline is able to meet those expectations consistently, which is the reason why you'll find it difficult to switch, because you're used to how seats in economy are laid out, how seats in business are laid out, what kind of facilities and benefits you get in the lounge, whether you get this access to the lounge just at your local airport or your hub or all across the world and globe where this airline operates. So these are all factors that sort of fit in, that sort of link or hook you to an existing relationship. And captive customers in niche markets are markets where you find that there is a lot of room to play. And the reason why there is a lot of room to play is, if you just go back to the previous slide, once you get one market, so let's say you go out and do well with people who work on Wall Street, right? So you go out and factor this market in and you knock this out. And then, from here you move on to publishing and media. And then from here you move on to entertainment. And then you move on to sports. If you were to simply, let's go back. If you were to simply extend this, what you're effectively saying is, this was mainstream. So this was mainstream.
Mainstream is on the first one.
Shh. Baba's working. No disturbing. Okay, thank you. So this was mainstream, and we had financial services here, and we had sports here, and we had entertainment here, and we had publishing and media here, right? So let's say you were able to knock these guys out because they didn't have a very active or effective presence. They were doing a lousy job of figuring out what the Wall Street types needed and giving it to them, and you come in and you sort of lock this market in, right? So you've now taken a small portion, you've sort of taken care of the edge, right? And then you did this and you said, okay, if I've done this, I can also do this. So you come out and take this market out. And then from here, you go out because you've taken publishing and media and you already have financial services. You go out and get entertainment, and then you go out and get sports. So suddenly, from being a nobody, you now have about 30% here and about 30% here. You go from being a 2-bit sideline player to become a majority power player in this specific space. That's the power of coming in from the edges. That's the power of coming from the niches. And then there is intense pressure on these guys from all four sides. And if you want to, you could then further redefine this mainstream and identify additional niches on these edges, 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 on these edges. This is the business that becomes the next piece of so you're basically saying, I'm going to take this piece, I'm going to go out and take this piece. So after I've done this, I'll move here and I'll further expand my reach in the space by capturing these components, right? So again, the advantage that you've just created is an advantage that came about because you went out and redefined the space and how to compete in that space. Okay, and this, as we said earlier, is the second primary competitive advantage. It's called the advantage of captive customers or niche markets. And the idea is that you start off with a single bowling pin, and then you get the next 3, then you get the next 5, and by the time people start noticing, you've sort of captured the market. That's the objective. That's the concept of working with the second competitive advantage, right? Now the third and final one, and the one that sometimes people go ahead and quote as part of the business plan is what we call proprietary processes. So the number 3 is what's called prop processes. So a lot of time, prop process. A lot of time, startups and new ventures and entrepreneurs come out and say that, we have a proprietary process. Our proprietary process allows us to build a competitive advantage over our competition. And this proprietary process is the technology engine that we wrote. It's the code that we wrote. It's the hardware that we have. It's the way we hire people and talent. It's the way we machine stuff. It's the way we design things. So a long list of elements and items. Now, to some extent, this may be true. But the test that we're interested in as an entrepreneur is sustainability. Is it possible for you to sustain this competitive advantage? Can you actually go out and defend this in the long run? And in the long run, the easiest way to test this is to ask you the simple question. If you look at Coke or Pepsi, look at Coke and Pepsi, and you go out and create a formula which is an exact replication of Coke's formula. Does this mean that you would be able to compete effectively with them? The correct answer to this question is obviously no, because the primary competitive advantage that Coke and Pepsi enjoy is not the proprietary process. It's not the prop process. It's actually scale. That's something that we covered earlier. To some extent, you'll see the same question and a similar answer when it comes to, let's say, the field of enterprise software. If you in enterprise software. If you work for an enterprise software vendor and steal their code base and start selling it independently, does this mean that you will be able to compete effectively with them? And again, the answer is going to be no, because in the space of enterprise software, just because you have a product or a solution is not enough for you to get the break you need. You need a track record. You need reference sites. You need customers who are comfortable with your ability to deliver on the product. Customers who are comfortable with your team, and so on and so forth. So there are a number of additional factors that drive whether having a product or a solution with you is sufficient, or is there more to it. And that's where we get back to the question of is proprietary process really the advantage that you enjoy? Because if it could be stolen, if it could be replicated, if somebody could be inspired by the solution that you've just created to build something which is similar, however at the same time is cheaper, faster, better, leaner, meaner, and more effective, then yes, to some extent I would say that you may have an issue. However, in real life, you'll find that finding a sustainable competitive advantage linked to proprietary process is very, very difficult, very, very rare. And because there are things that can be replaced, that could be sidestepped, that could be substituted, which sort of take this away from you. There are only, I think, I would say there are possibly only two industries where prop processes play a part. I think the first is big pharma. So if you have a chemical compound that you have a patent on, then yes, you have an edge, you have an advantage. And the second example that I would quote is something that I found out quite by accident, which is the oil and gas industry, specifically the refinery processes. So every time you crack a hydrocarbon molecule and you put this cracking process in a refinery, you actually have to pay a royalty for using the process on every single barrel of oil, right? And I think the oil and gas industry and refining industry have gone to great lengths to make sure that this competitive advantage is protected. It's not easy, it's not simple, it's not every Tom, Dick, and Harry who can go ahead and put up a refinery. There's actually firms that specialize in implementing a specific process. And when I say, the oil, gas, and the refining industry has done a great job of protecting this process, that's exactly what I mean. This process drives royalties simply because this process is controlled, or rather, access to this process is controlled. So if you bring back everything that we've covered so far in the last few minutes, what you're really saying is that let's quickly review. What you're really saying is that there are three advantages, right? The first is scale. The second is what we call a captive customer. The third is proprietary process, right? So captive customer, scale, and proprietary process. Now, scale, as you've seen, is you can't become Intel overnight. You can't become Coke or Pepsi overnight. You can't even become FedEx overnight, because this requires a large and substantial investment in capital, which in most cases, at least in my humble experience and opinion, is something that startups are very, very quite short on. So, if you think that getting off the gate, the first advantage that you will build is scale. I, as an investor or as a judge to your suggestion, would possibly question this assumption. Right? Second is proprietary process. So if you look at big pharma, or for that matter, if you look at the oil and gas industry, again, these are very capital intensive processes. Just like a chip takes about $2 to $4 billion, a new drug takes around about the same amount. A new significant substantial mainstream drug requires the same amount of effort and capital when it comes to building a product pipeline. But then if you look at the one in the middle, which is captive customers, what does captive customers entail? Do you need capital? You don't. If you go back to what we spoke about earlier in our model, it just requires you to compete on the edge. It requires you to walk away from the mainstream, not compete where your competition is at its strongest, but compete with the competition where it's weakest. The edge. The edge where there is an unhappy customer who feels that he's not getting the right treatment, the right value, the right features, the right product, or the right time from the competition. And if you focus on just this one specific aspect, if you make this your mainstream, as we worked earlier, this then becomes your entry. And over a period of time, if you're smart about it and they're dumb about it, there's a very good chance that you'd actually take a very large part of the market away from them. So here's the one lesson that you need to take away from this entire discussion, and that one lesson is that if you're a startup, if you're a small shop, if you're a team of two guys and a dream, and if you're short on capital, which is a very, very likely and probable scenario in case, short on capital, right? Then if you come in front of me and I'm the investor, or I'm your audience, and I'm a judge at a business plan company, if you come in front of me and say, look, I want to go ahead and build scale, my natural reaction is obviously going to be how and with what. Or if you come out and say, I have a proprietary process, I would again, have an issue in terms of credibility, because most proprietary processes may not necessarily be sustainable, and the ones that truly are actually quite expensive to build it. You can't just build it overnight. It takes some time. takes an effort, takes a fair bit of contribution on all parties concerned. However, if rather than saying that I have 1 and 3 or 1 or 3, if you come out and say that, look, I'm a smart guy, I understand this is the mainstream market, I understand that I'm a teeny weeny itsy bitsy little company, that I can't compete with the big guys. However, I am really really good at understanding what this segment requires, markets, wants, desires, and is not getting right now. And I'm just going to focus my efforts on making sure that I completely dominate this chunk. You have a shot. You have a shot at making a credible case. You have a shot at convincing me that, look, if I can get this one bit right, then there is a possibility that I might get the next one right also. And if I get this one right, there is a possibility that I might get this one right. And if I get this one right, there's a possibility that I get this one right. If I get all of them right in the right time, in the right time frame, at the right price, there's a reasonable chance that I may actually become a fairly painful thorn in the side of the mainstream players. Okay, right. So now, from a presentation point of view, then, what I would recommend is that when it comes to present, and now we go back to pitching, you have to understand, you have to very, very clearly understand and document what exactly is your competitive advantage. And you have to figure out, what's the easiest, simplest possible way of pitching this advantage to an investor. And as I said, unless and until you have $1 billion in the bank or funding locked in for $250 million over the next 3 or 4 years, the simplest and easiest way is to actually go out and focus on the niche. Focus on one segment and use this one segment to completely and totally dominate that market. And once you get this right, this does a couple of things. For an investor, first of all, it provides him or her with a test case. Provides you to prove the value that you've spoken about, that you're going to create with your product over the next 3, 4, 6, 10, 15, 20 months. You actually have the chance to prove that this works in a controlled environment. Number 3, by focusing on a given segment, you significantly improve the chances of success. Because the message that you're delivering is actually quite clear and very easy and simple to understand. The message that you're delivering is that, I really, really understand who you are, and who you are, takes us back to the issue of customer persona. So I've really taken out the time to invest, to document, to understand, and to analyze who you are and what you want. And the product that I've built is a perfect fit with what you need and what you want at the terms and conditions that you want and need them at. And then if you can do a good job of winning the battle here, there are many more niches that you can focus and work on. Jeffrey Moore is an author that wrote and did a lot of research on exactly this category and type of competitive strategy. And he calls this the bowling pin example, where if you get the first pin, you can use that to get the second. If you get the second, you can get the third, and then the fourth, and then so on and so forth. Right? So get this right. Get this right. Everything else will follow through. This will allow you to move from one market to the next. And as you move further and further, at each level, your case becomes more stronger and more likely and more credible. Alright, so this concludes our session on competitive advantage. I just want to again emphasize that while a lot of of young engineers and graduates and college students and first time entrepreneurs believe that technology is a competitive advantage, you've seen that in essence, the one advantage that really makes and works for you is is this focus on customer, which sort of should shed a lot more light on why we spend so much time on documenting who the customer is, where is he coming from, and creating a much more focused approach to a pitch. There is, this is credible, and unless and until you have money in the bank to do scale or to do a proper process, your best bet is to focus on an approach, on a strategy that comes from a captive customer piece, which again, takes us back to one of the first lessons that we touched when we started talking about pitching. And when we started talking about pitching, we said, you may have a really world class team that builds a really world class product, but if the customer on this side does not agree, so that's your team and this is your product, and you go and spend a couple of $1 million on building the world class product, but if your customer disagrees, does not understand, does not appreciate, or simply doesn't need what you've done, all of this goes to waste. This is one of the biggest reasons why new ventures, why small businesses fail, and they fail because they don't know who the customer is, they don't know where to find him, they don't know how to talk to him, they don't know how to pitch to him, they don't know how to build products that meet his specific needs, they don't understand how to charge for those products. These are all factors or reasons why two guys in a room start a company, spend 6 to 8 months on it, and then at the end realize that this is not going to work out. The reason why it's not going to work out is not because entrepreneurship is hard and difficult. The reason why it's difficult, the reason why it doesn't work out is because we simply forget this specific lesson. We don't do our homework on the specific side, and unless and until this homework is done, there is no hope for you to either win or succeed. I hope you've enjoyed yourself. I hope this has given you enough room for thought. As a homework assignment, what I now want you to do is, if you've done the first piece where I asked you to think about how you're going to go ahead and pitch it, I now want you to think about what exactly is your competitive advantage. And how do you link it to the customer personas you've gone out and built earlier? And how do you link it to the product features that you are going to work on in the sessions that will come in the future? And how does this actually goes ahead and connects with your business plan? And what's the best possible way of making a simple, to the point, concise, and effective pitch? Thank you very much for your time. I hope that I'll get to see you again. Thank you very much for your time. This is Jawad Ahmed Fareed signing off for FinanceTrainingCourse.com.